a big hint right now for that discussion topic, right? Kids, you know, underage drinking and driving and doing things like that because of the personal fable. They don't think it's going to happen to them. So let's see, are they really socially sensitive? Yes, they are. You know, they're emotional, they're stressed out, they're worried about what other people are thinking of them. If it's a particularly you know, high stress situation, an emotionally charged situation, people are fighting, you got your heart broken, somebody's talking bad to you or about you or your friend, you know, very emotional situations. Teenagers can become very susceptible to peer pressure. So jumping in and starting a big fight or vandalizing something or, you know, partaking in some risky behaviors is very common in a situation where there's a lot of emotion. Oh, this is a good thing down here too, right? There definitely is a tendency for immediate gratification over future rewards. So teenagers are very kind of in it for the moment. It's very hard for them to delay any future rewards. Are they risk takers? Yeah, maybe not a huge amount, but yes, they do definitely do more risky behavior than the average person walking around this planet. So here it's saying 1 in 6 have been arrested by the age of 18. By the age of 23, the arrest rate is 1 in 3. Okay, so a lot of kids getting arrested. Your most common ones are probably minor in possession, DWIs or DUIs, vandalism, assault, theft, right, would be some of those top arrests that happen at this age. Here it says most high school seniors report having sampled alcohol. You know, about 20% report drinking 5 or more drinks at one time. And most high school seniors report not using drugs. But again, this is based on self-report. And we know teenagers are not the most truthful in their survey answering. This is just looking at illicit drug use reported from seniors throughout the years. Obviously, this is very behind. I'd like to point out that my year was the lowest, way high in the 70s, and here we are going into the 2000s. I would bet that this is higher again, and that's only because I believe that with the legalization of marijuana, it kind of gives the impression that it's okay to do. And you probably have a lot younger people feeling like it's okay to do. I'm not judging marijuana users at all. I just say on a young brain, marijuana use is not good. It's not good because it is linked to your more severe psychological problems like schizophrenia and bipolar. That's a little bit difficult to say which one came first. Is it the marijuana use that causes those disorders, or were these people already feeling some of those symptoms and a way to self-medicate is marijuana? So was it the disorder that came first and caused the marijuana use? But that one I don't know, but you know that we know that those two are linked. Okay, so your severe psych disorders and early marijuana use. This is like a 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old brain, you know, using marijuana that young. We also know that long-term marijuana use on a young brain lowers their dopamine levels, and which is sad because we have adults who can't feel joy. They don't feel happy. It's not that they're depressed, they're just, their emotions are muted. You know, they don't feel joy in things anymore. And I think that that's kind of sad. So if you're going to smoke marijuana, well, don't smoke it, because it does also cause lung cancer and all those bad things, and COPD and emphysema. But if you do use it, you know, I just say be a little bit older, let your brain develop first. Um, let's see. Are they more emotional? Yes, for the most part. You know, they're not like super well, you do have some that are pretty emotional. You have some that are depressed and really suffering from a lot of problems. But I think we get the sense that most teenagers are like this. It's very common in, say, TV shows or series or movies to kind of play the teenager as all gothed out, all in black, depressed, and they hate the world and stuff like that. And not all teenagers are like that. Most teenagers are happy, they're confident, they're looking forward to the future. You ask the parents how the teenagers are, and most parents are going to say, they're good kids, they get good grades, and they're doing well. So do we have some that are struggling? Yes, right here that says about 6%. But for the most part, most of them are feeling pretty good. So this emotional storm, that we see with kids, yeah, a lot of risk-taking behaviors, stealing, crime, drinking, drug use, things like that. Depression is pretty high. Something else that we see is what they call non-suicidal self-injury, or you could call it self-harm, you could call it cutting, or self-mutilation. This is fairly common in young people. They can say between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 young people engage in self-injury. If a teenager is doing this, the one thing to remember is it's also a way to self-medicate, because physical pain will trump emotional pain. Physical pain will take precedence in your brain over emotional pain. So if that child is hurting for some reason or really sad, then cutting forces them to focus on that, and it takes away the focus from the emotional pain. I think this is why we have a lot of people that say kids are attempting suicide, but just know this isn't an attempt. Of course, if you walk in and you see a child or a teenager doing this, I would certainly ask them if they're planning on killing themselves, ask them to talk about it a little bit, and obviously get this child help. I don't think they need to be taken to the hospital. I don't think they need to be admitted. If they say that this is all that they're doing, then I think just getting that child to somebody to talk to. Oh, these are the arrests, right? Seems like 19 is our #1 year to get arrested. This is just California. All right, let's see. So teens, there's a lot going on, and this, some people chase popularity. Not all teens chase popularity, but you certainly don't want to become unpopular, right? You may not be fighting to become the most popular, but teenagers are very cognizant of not falling down the social ranks, right? You certainly don't want to be someone that gets picked on or something like that. So anyone who's fighting to be in a popular group, that definitely intensifies aggression. So if the girls are trying to be popular, you're going to see a lot of relational aggression. If boys are fighting to be popular, you're going to see a lot of physical aggression. And obviously, isolation from any crowd can lead to unhappiness. So teenage pathways, right? You can have the good pathway or you can have the bad pathway. So the at-risk teens I have in red over here. These are your teens that are at risk for all kinds of issues. These are kids who weren't good at emotion regulation, so they're either your bullies or your crybabies. Poor family relationships for sure, and any non-nurturing environment. The teens that are on a good path have good executive functioning, so they have good emotion regulation, they're making good choices, planning and judgment. they have a mentor, they have good family relationships, they have pro-social friends, they're doing good in school, they have strong communities and schools. A lot of times we find that these kids have a passion or a talent, right? They might be an athlete or an artist or a dancer or something along those lines. And we typically see that they tend to have a strong religious faith and commitment. So one thing, these are just, possibilities, right? That if you have a child or a kid that has these situations over here in the at risk, it does not mean that something bad is going to happen to them. It doesn't mean that they're doomed, okay? You can have kids on this end that have all of this going for them, and they still turn out to be, go down that bad path. So these are not, scenarios where you're locked in, where it's a guarantee. But I just think if we have kids over here, those are like red flags that you want to pay attention to. So this is, trying to make the world a better place for teenagers. Definitely don't punish adolescents as if they were just like an adult, because we know their brain is not functioning like that. They don't have the frontal lobes. They don't have the judgment and the planning. So a lot of focus on rehabilitation. This exists somewhat, right? We have a little bit of this, but when we hear people calling for, prison reform or drug rehabilitation, things like that, this is what we're talking about, right? Let's pay attention to these teens and not just throw them in jail. Reconsider zero tolerance. Really here we have the, 1, 2, 3, right? First time offender, second time offender compared to the third time offender. So the 3 strikes you're out. So we don't really have zero tolerance in the court system. At school, I don't know. If you do something, you might get expelled and kicked out. So maybe working with them and reconsider this zero tolerance. Encourage youth development programs, things that we could get kids involved in a little bit more here in the community. And considering teen sleep patterns. Teenagers sleep a lot. They're growing a lot, just like a newborn, right? The 2 fastest growing humans on the planet are infants and teenagers. Infants, we know, sleep a lot. Teenagers need to sleep a lot so that they can grow. There's a lot going on with them. A teenager, their sleep pattern also shifts. Where we have little kids fall asleep early, wake up early, and you have older people fall asleep early and wake up early. That teenage group actually shifts. They fall asleep really late and they sleep really late. It's just a natural phenomenon. It just happens. And we need to be aware of that, so having school start at, 8 a.m. sometimes isn't the best fit for a teenager. High schools now start closer to 9, but some people argue that that's still too early. Have the school start at 12 and go till 6, 7 o'clock at night. You're going to capture the teenagers' most waking hours, and you're going to keep them off of the street afterwards, not to do some risky behaviors. But I don't know if you're going to find teachers that are willing to work that late at night. So, but that's something to think about. Teenager relationships, they for the most part, again, most teenagers report having a positive interaction with their parents. However, teenagers are most happy with their friends. Their, uplifting moments with their families and negative emotions outweigh positives 10 to 1. And most fights that happen between teenagers and their parents are basically over independence. You have parents that don't want to give the independence to the teenager, and the teenager that's fighting for independence. They want a phone, they want a car, they want later curfew, they want, ability to go do things more and more. And the parents are fighting, letting go of that. I skip that. Immigration, we have obviously America has a lot of immigrants and people that come with different cultures and different values. And so most of what we're learning in here is kind of your white Anglo-European descent type of America, immigrants that come in and have, like, specifically from the eastern part of the world, have a very different culture. So children are not going to be questioning their parents. Children are not going to be just trying to go out and trying to do all these different things. They probably won't move out at 18. Girls understand they can't go do things that their brother can do. So we always want to take into consideration immigrants, and when we look at other cultures here in America, some of these things don't necessarily hold up. Erikson, remember Erikson? Erik Erikson came up with the social development for infants. He had trust versus mistrust. For children, he had, or for toddlers, he had autonomy versus shame. For children, you have the, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on it? The industry and the I can't think of what it is, but right, where they feel like they're, initiative versus like guilt and not feeling like they can contribute. Then the teenager, we get into this identity, and it's identity versus role confusion. So identity is the social task of a teenager, according to Erikson. And so he says they need to figure out who they are. And if they don't figure out who they are, then they're going to suffer with the role confusion. Now, you probably can think of some people who go through this, but for the most part, everybody turns out okay, right? Nobody gets locked into this role confusion and they just are doomed for the rest of their life. They don't know who they are. But certainly I guess we could think of some ideas where this happens. So Erikson says, right, it's the role of the teenager to figure out who they are, and they do this by trying out different versions of themselves. So if you think back to high school, you can see all of these groups, right? You have the jocks, you have the preppy kids, you have the skaters, and you have the druggies, and you have, all these different like groups. And this is a way that teenagers can try out different identities. And we say that social identity that comes from the group can also help the teenager figure out who they are. They might join one group and say, okay, this is not me. This is not who I am. I'm going to go over here, okay, and join this other group. So Erikson says you have to figure out your identity before you can get into the next stage, which is intimacy. And intimacy, we don't mean like sex. We mean it as being open and honest with another person, a true relationship with another person. And so he says the only way to do that is to know who you are. Okay. This just gets into groups. We don't have to go over this too much, but a clique is a small group, a crowd is a large group. Purpose of crowds, is just, again, for a way for teenagers to figure out who they are. The group can help them define who they are. It's a way for you to find similar interests. Jocks obviously are all sporty, so they kind of have their own identity and their own interests that go on. These guys have their own interests that go on. So that's the purpose of a group or a crowd. So here are some of these crowds that we see. Some of these names make me laugh. I don't know, I've never heard of a grind, but so the academics, right? You can have the brains, the nerds, the geeks, jocks, the athletes, popular kids, right? The preppies, the deviants. You can have the burnouts, the dirts, the freaks. I don't know. These are just funny names. The residual type, the goths, right? The skaters and emos and things like that. So lots of different groups, and these take place at all of the high schools, across America. Okay. Looking at some of these groups, so the research here, right, is interesting. So you can go in and ask people, you know, what group do you identify with? And then in this instance, they gave them a depression test, okay? So up here is high on feelings of depression. So these people are depressed. This is low on feelings of depression. So these people are not depressed, okay? Following them through the years from elementary to high school, all right? So the green, the brains, they were happy in elementary school and they became increasingly depressed through high school. You have popular kids way up here, pretty depressed in elementary and became quite happy in high school, okay? We see this mix here because of what is considered popular at the time. In elementary school, the smart kids are usually the popular ones, right? Sports don't really matter in elementary school because they don't have them, right? Popular kids, stuff like that, beauty, it's not really an issue. In high school, those things are more valuable. Athletes, jocks, you know, looks, and so on. So that'll earn you more happiness. Brains, unfortunately, they're not as determined as important in high school, and so they could become increasingly depressed. This up here, this is not just the top of our graph. This is actually a line for our burnouts, our druggies, our deviant type, okay? And we can see that through elementary running through high school, they consistently score high on depression. Okay, so they were depressed in elementary school, which probably led them to kind of interact with each other and form the groups of the druggies and so on. That just makes perfect sense. We have bad crowds, right? Just like we have good crowds. The good crowds, you know, arguably could be your nerds, your brains, and so on. I don't know if I'd put the athletes in there, but, you know, I guess from appearances, athletes look to be like a better crowd, but I think we all can agree that just as many bad things can happen in the athlete group as some of the bad groups. Deviancy training is something that happens in bad groups where they egg each other on to do more and more bad things. So if a kid, you know, steals something from the store and his friends all are like, hey man, that's so cool that you did that. Well, he's being trained, right? He's being rewarded for doing something bad. So deviancy training happens in these bad groups, okay? In all of these crowds, you have one popular kid, and then you have people that are trying to be popular in that group. So if you think of like football, probably the quarterback is the most popular kid, right? So then you have all these other football players who are trying to do things to become popular like the quarterback. So they might practice harder, they might make a really good play, they might exercise more. And if they get rewarded for that, or the quarterback says, hey man, that was a really cool play that you did, now he's training him to be a better athlete. The brains, right? If, hey, you aced your SAT, everybody thinks you're so cool for doing that, then that's training you to be more academic, okay? In a bad crowd, usually the worst kid, the most deviant kid is the most popular one, and he will train his followers to try and be bad like he is, okay? This hostile attributional bias, this is getting into social psychology actually, but this is where you just assume a hostile situation when it's really in fact an ambiguous situation. Let me put it this way, you automatically assume the worst in a totally mundane situation. So this could be a kid who walks in to the classroom. Everybody's kind of looking at him, and he starts like, what are you looking at? Doing things like that and assuming that it's a hostile situation when everybody else is like, well, I was just looking at you because you walked in, we're all staring at you, like totally a normal scenario. So what can happen here is, let's say you have a group, say here it's saying gangs, right? You have a group, a gang, and it's Friday night, a football game, and everybody wants to go to the football game, and the gang members show up. Maybe the teachers and the, you know, some of the kids in the crowd and maybe the security guards that are there, you know, turn and look at the gang, and maybe they're looking at them, but automatically the gang starts saying like, oh, see, here they go. They're all staring at us. They don't want us here. They're judging us, whatever. They interpret it as a hostile situation. And the same for the teachers and the security guards and everybody else. They look at them and say, oh, they're probably going to start trouble. Okay, and so they start interpreting it as a hostile situation, when really everybody just wanted to go to enjoy the game. Okay. You know, a little bit about gangs here. You know, it's a close-knit group, but it's more than that. It serves a purpose. They often provide protection for the members that are in the gang. A lot of times they provide income for the members. You know, if you think of some of these really big gangs, it's a family affair. You know, it's multi-generational, and it's really hard to go in and try and say to these younger kids like, hey, you shouldn't be in a gang because this is bad for you, when they're sitting there going, well, my dad was in it, my grandpa was in it, my, you know, cousins and my uncles. You know, it's really hard to kind of change that mentality. And, you know, honestly, you want to sit there and kind of think of, why did gangs come about to begin with? There's a really good book. It's pretty old by now, but I think it ultimately still stands true. And it's called The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. And it talks about like how gangs came about because everybody's been sold on the idea of the American dream, that we get the big house, the nice car, and the nice clothes. And the idea goes that there's certain people within the American society that have the means to get that. We go to good schools, we get good jobs, and we get the big house and the nice car and so on. And the minority groups have a lot of roadblocks set in place where they don't get those means. They don't get the good schools. They don't get the good jobs. They don't get that ability to get the big car and the nice house, or a big house and nice car. And so they came up with their own way of getting money. And so the book is interesting because it talks about how once they started doing that stuff, they started criminalizing that behavior. You know, if you think about it, why is it okay to sell tobacco? And all of those, you know, really rich people who sell tobacco, they're, you know, millionaires or whatever. But, oh, if someone's going to go sell marijuana, oh, that's criminal and you're going to go to prison. So it challenges you and it makes you think of these different things and ultimately why, you know, gangs came about. So that's that. All right. Understanding adolescence, I think just know that our teenagers here, as much as they are maybe, you know, stressing and they're suffering from embarrassment, everything embarrasses them, and they're, you know, miserable, and they might complain that they hate their life and they hate school and all of this stuff. Ultimately, they're quite lucky for having such problems. It's definitely a first world problem, being a teenager. Not all countries, not all nations around the world even have adolescents. That word doesn't even exist. They don't even know what that is. Kids can be married off at the age of 12. They can enter the sex trade. They can be forced to be soldiers. It's not, as soon as puberty hits, they become adults, and those bad things can happen to them. So our teenagers here are really lucky to be facing the problems of what jeans to wear, and I think that's it for this one. It is. So if anybody has any questions, I will post this. And just remember that one assignment was for the discussion board. We'll handle some of these issues and then leading into the next week's chapter, the emerging adult. So I will see you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank you.